Well, I want to welcome you also today. This subject is, as you know, dear to my heart, but I've held off for 4 years because obviously the focus of the community was all the lost homes and the damages to the businesses and the area. And talking about a forest when people lost homes seemed like I should wait a while. So that's why I waited 4 years since the fire. Now when I was doing this, that's the name I came up with. And I thought, I really want to have a little more pizzazz. So all you do is you have some friends over, a glass of wine, a glass of brandy, and the Wethies, and they come up with a good story. And as you can see, the play on the words there. But that's what I really wanted to talk about right from the beginning, is our forest. What we're going to talk about, will there be more fires? Yeah. In fact, they're going to be hot, fast fires because the brush is coming back in. I talk about creating a Mediterranean landscape, which is like Southern California, where the native vegetation is going to disappear if we don't do something about it. We've lost 500,000 acres, not only just the fire, but other, and you'll hear about. Obviously we didn't want this to happen. And what did humans have to do with it, and what about the regulations? Those are some of the subjects that Walt and I will talk about. We're breaking this into 4 segments. The first, Walter will take care of our lost forest, and we'll talk about the total loss of our forest from over time. Second, I'm going to talk about was our seedlings of hope a waste of time. A lot of folks say, why are you planting trees? In fact, I had an old friend of mine years ago when he toured the property, and I took him to a plantation. He says, why are you planting trees? It's just going to burn down. Yeah, and this guy was a forester with the Forest Service, so yeah. And so there are still people saying, is it really doing any good to go out and plant trees? And then we're going to talk about the care. If we plant these trees, how do we take care of the trees and not just leave them on their own? So those are the 4 segments, and I'll kick it over right now to Walter.
Good afternoon. What a wonderful turnout. Thank you all for being here. Little background on me just to get going. I've been a consulting forester for about 5 years now. I currently work for Southern California Edison as their forester up here in Shaver. So that's management of the Edison forest lands around Shaver Lake and out of Dinky. I'm going to kick us off talking about our lost forest, and really it's not lost. It's still out there. It's maybe not what we would recognize as a forest now, and it's got some differences in what we might like it to be, but we can get it back, and there's a lot of opportunity to be had. This photo you can kind of see. This is kind of out in the West Kaiser area. We can see some areas of mortality. This was a burn area right here. There's some beetle activity right here. And this is typical of a healthy forest. We've got a lot of areas in timber production. We've got some mortality. There's brush patches and openings. creating more of a mosaic kind of pattern on the landscape. And that's really what we're striving for and looking to achieve in a lot of the ground that was impacted by the creek fire and by the beetle mortality. And the goal is going to be to get back to this condition. This is a tough picture. You can see the transmission lines here. This was Pine Ridge during the beetle mortality. It impacted the Ponderosa Pine area very, very heavily. This is what is known as kind of transitional ground. It's maybe a little bit more difficult site and soils. It was heavily stocked with timber, quite a bit more than its historic carrying capacity would have allowed. So an epidemic of bark beetles kind of got started, and weather patterns and conditions for the next few years allowed that population to kind of steamroll a bunch of our transitional ground, the area, and by transitional ground I mean area between Chaparral and what our Sierra Nevada conifer stand takes over. So this is ground somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 feet in the southern Sierra Nevada. The creek fire, that's kind of the footprint of it. It also took out a large chunk of that elevation range, 3,000 to 5,000 feet. You can see it went up to San Joaquin River drainage, Jose Basin, a lot of the timbered area. There was some fire footprints up by Mammoth Pool. A lot of that ground has kind of got reset to zero, and that's what we want to avoid. That sort of damage really, it's not a mosaic, it's the same. It's brush, it's skeletons, it's a problem. There's a photo after the fire. High intensity fire, as we've all seen. Complete tree mortality, a lot of soil loss from erosion, all the damaging effects of catastrophic fire. So this is an aerial image of Jose Basin in 2014. That's 2015. You can notice all the brown. It's a little hard to see on this projector, but you can see the brown patches. That's all beetle mortality. You can see some over here in Blue Canyon. And then that's post-creek fire. So that's kind of the ground we're trying to target for our reforestation purposes. A lot of the kind of the edge transition ground, you can see this is Stevenson Mountain. You kind of roll down the 6 mile into Cressman's. You know, some of that area that was dirty burn, we call it, where the fire laid down and went on the ground, a lot of that will take care of itself through natural regeneration where there's still a seed stock. But if you remember that picture from before where it was heavy intensity fire, there's no seed left there. So that's where the reforestation efforts really come into focus and really cut a lot of time off of the amount of time it would take to get that area back into timber and back into what we would traditionally think of as a forest. That's kind of what I've come up with, John and I have come up with for our historic timber extent and kind of the differences between, that was our estimation for 1850, and that's kind of our current timber line, what it is today. That's the 500,000 acres that John was talking about earlier. And the ground, the transition ground in our mid-elevation area that we want to focus on for this. All right, I'll give it back to John.
Well, let's see if I got my voice back a little better now. Why do we want to plant trees? Well, this is how these trees start. Right when the smoke was still from the creek fire, a group of young people got together. I wasn't among them at the first, but they got together and they said they want to do something about the community. And as you know, there was a lot of different organizations that really came together. You talk about it takes a village or it takes a community. The area, Shaver, the whole area stepped up, and 4 or 5 organizations provided money for people that lost their homes. The church, of course, helped with their wells. Just a tremendous outgrowth of community support. But these folks, this young group, said, no, we want to be long-lived. We want to be seen and about taking care of our community and the forest. And that's what they were interested in. And so they formed the Central Sierra Resiliency Fund. And this group, and just it pleases me that they asked me to help, because they were just a young bunch of go-getters and have done some tremendous work, including that book, by the way. If you have not seen that book, be sure and get that book. A wonderful book, the story of all the people affected by that. But their main objective was to be around for a while and get our community back. The forest that would drive up the road and see all the way up, all the wildlife, all that was their long-term vision, the Resiliency Fund. And they were able to join together with the Historical Society, and as you see our banner here, they are still going. And these trees here, this group has started seedlings. We had Tom Mulholland donated his nursery and is growing seedlings for us. The Resiliency Fund, all donations, and a lot of donors that planted trees, planted on private property up and down the highway and towards Albury Road and all that area. So just an enthusiastic group that wants to be around for the long term to take care of our community. So this is one of the first volunteer days. You can see there's some pretty stark area, as you know. You drive right by that when you come up the road. It's Shaver Ranch. And volunteers showed up and planted trees that day. And this happens to be our granddaughter from Texas. And the best part about that is the old people are standing there and the young people are working. That's a real thing, accomplishment. A couple years later, here's that same tree. You can see that stump there was a stump in the previous picture, same stump. And you can see the trees behind. So we know that's the same tree. Now you see all that, what's called cheat grass. I was hoping there was a biologist would be here who's just all upset because this cheat grass is an invasive species and it's not native. And as you can see, it's kind of taken over that plantation. The bad news is a fire starts, that will burn so fast. It wouldn't do a whole lot of damage except to those old trees. But it will burn very, very, very fast, not like a normal forest fire. But if it can keep going with no fire, those trees will outgrow the cheatgrass. And it's actually good. The good news is this will produce, as it lays down, it will provide organic material before we start getting pine needles back on the ground. Now, as most of you have noticed, as you drive up and look at the footprint of the fire, a lot of rock that we didn't really know was there. It was all covered with pine needles and brush and trees. And so you look at that and you think, oh my God, how are we going to get trees back there? Well, these trees were planted the same day as you saw that our granddaughter painted, the same day. And some volunteer went out there and beat hard and planted 3 trees, and they're all growing. So that shows you that we'll be able to cover all those rocks that we didn't see because they were covered before. We'll be able to cover those areas. So just it really tickles me pink that some volunteer went there and planted right there where I didn't think they would be able to get trees going. So really neat. So that's what it looks like where there's not cheatgrass. I always told the volunteers to try and plant next to a stump, because obviously if a tree was grown there before, a new tree will grow there now. So look at that thing, it's growing really good there. Now this picture was taken in 1975. Are you familiar with Dorabella Plantation? It's between East Village and Shaver Lake. And it was a brush field that resulted from the early logging of shaver lands. Now, note that on that, this area here is Stevenson Mountain. Okay, so now you know where you are on that. So, then in 1980, I arrived on the ground, and that same plantation, you can see the size of trees of that Bill Wingo had planted. So, what's that, 30 years or so, 25? Those are that size. But look at the brush growing. It was horrendous trying to get in there and walk through that. No deer would walk through there. no animals. It just is becomes kind of a desert kind of for wildlife. So that's what I'm talking about, maintaining, and I'll get into that a little later. So that's what it looked like in 1980. In about 1995 to 97, that's the same plantation now. All those old trees, we actually harvested trees. We logged that area, same plantation, in the same area as that last slide. It's thinned out. It was called cut to length. They went out and machinery cut that, and then we burned. So now we've opened up that forest. So that's, you saw in 1975, in 1980, 1995, and now what it looks like today, last end of July. That's the same place approximately. In fact, I'm going to lie to you right now. I'm going to say that tree right there was the one that Bill Wingo was. It is so close, it's amazing. You can see in the background a very different Stevenson Mountain. See, and we'll talk about, I call that Mohawk Hill now instead of Stevenson Mountain, because there's a strip of trees on top. But look at that beautiful, beautiful forest, planted in 1975, and now what it looks like today. Nice sized tree, a very successful plantation. We're getting reproduction there. You see the little trees. We're also getting other species of trees. A lot of people say, oh, especially the Forest Service says, can't plant just pine, you have to have other species or you'll have a monoculture. And you can see without going in there, naturally other species of trees will invade on that, and brush will invade. So it's just developed into a very, very successful plantation. And like I said, in that period of time. Now, so I kind of think we covered the fact that we planted trees and it is successful. So that's what we can look forward to in the future of planting the trees. And I know you'll all be around in 70 or 80 years and to see that forest. I plan on being there. Now, there's other people say, you know, not only is the plantation, if you plant trees, they're going to burn up, there's global warming. And everybody says, oh my God, global warming is going to kill all the trees and all that. A lot of people think that global warming affected our forests. For example, that those two lines that Walter talked about, where the forest was in 1850 and now, that was not global warming. Our forest existed very well with global warming. And the two areas, these in here, that tree, with the tree rings you see in the other room, that was born on the other side, right in this area right here. Let's see. Oops. I didn't get tested as operator. That was born in this area here. So global warming has not affected, in thousands of years, has not affected the forest. Now, obviously, what we humans have done is we almost, you know, we ask for it. We build our houses next to the ocean and in the bottom of rivers and those sorts of things. We humans are going to maybe suffer, but my forests, I have to say it that way, my forests are going to be just fine with global warming. It went through several years. In fact, this giant sequoias actually were born in this. So the sequoias have gone through 3 major global warming, and they look pretty good. If any of you have been over to Sequoia or Yosemite, they all look very good. So global warming is not a problem. Future fires are only going to be a problem of these plantations. Oh. I thought I was doing okay. Oh, yeah, now I hear.
Thank you, Donna.
So my point is, nature is not the problem. We are the problem. If we don't take care of our forests and our plantations, then they won't survive. But we have to take care of them. And in the next segment, I'll discuss more about maintaining our plantations. I really appreciate somebody helped me out with my voice today. So, besides, couldn't get any better than him.
How many birds do you want? John came up with all the titles, so. So, birds can be an excellent indicator of what sort of wildlife utilization you're getting out in the forest. Typically, areas that are less diverse, maybe they're heavy timber, not a lot of sunlight getting to the forest floor, completely covered with brush. Any large area that's all one veg type is going to have fewer birds, and it's going to actually have less wildlife interaction in that area. So what you really want to achieve is variability over any given landscape. You want to have young brush for grouse, for deer. You want to have seed producing species, conifer trees, producing seed food stocks for the birds and the wildlife that utilize that. You want to have areas accessible for birds of prey to be able to reach the ground and have flight corridors to be able to prey on varmints that live on the ground. So some of the indication of how many bird species is one of the ways that we can quantify how well that ground is being utilized by the wildlife. We had a wonderful cone crop this year. I don't know if anyone noticed all the cones on the sugar pine. That was that way across the board, and 90% of those seeds will actually go to food for wildlife. Very few of those will successfully regenerate naturally into another tree. So, and that's kind of the goal that we're looking for here, is to get those conifer trees, oaks. Black oaks are a wonderful source of food for wildlife, as well as historically for native populations. So that's the goal for getting all of this ground back into what we think of as our conifer forests. Large trees and variable landscapes. John brought up the cheatgrass. Annual grasses are not historically native to California. They were introduced when the Spanish came. Historically, this timberland area would have been a mix of chaparral species, perennial grasses, and conifer trees. The annual grasses present a relatively new challenge for land management, in that areas that seed back to annual grasses are a little more difficult to get back into timber. Even the brush sometimes has a hard time competing because of the thick thatch layer that's built up by the annual grasses. It also provides very consistent annual fuels for wildfire. Whereas typically that fuel load would have been broken up into brush fields and bunch grasses. Now we've got large areas that are covered by annual grasses that can annually burn, especially in the late summer. Anytime in the summer, once they die and dry out, it's a very volatile fuel source that has to be contended with when working on reforestation projects and managing forest land. This photo, you can kind of see what would be considered a fantastic mix of vegetation. This was a sugar pine that was harvested probably by John. He was pretty liberal with the paint gun. You can see we've got some ponderosa here. We've got some brush species, whitethorn and ceanothus, a little bit of those annual grasses coming in. We've got a black oak back here, and some overstory ponderosa pine there. And that mix is what wildlife prefers. You've got areas that are dense and provide rest areas and shelter areas for wildlife. You've got a forage species, and you've got some open ground. All of that mixed together will increase wildlife utilization and be able to make the forest more productive, not just for man, but for the animals that inhabit it. This area, you can see the introduction of fire in this area. And fire is one of the best ways to increase the variability over any particular landscape, especially in the southern Sierra Nevada. You've all been to one of John's talks before and heard him talk about fire, I'm sure. Yes, it's a big popular one. The fire actually, it tends to decrease the amount of dense regeneration areas and clear out some of the litter on the ground, allowing more variability from the plant species that are going to reestablish in that area. The lower successional species, that's favored by wildlife. You get the younger growth is utilized more by deer. We all like our deer. And will go into care and maintenance of our plantations now.
Yeah, that's, is that on now? This is a plantation that has been taken care of, on Edison now. Not only is it, fire, as you can see, there's fire on there, but, Edison, in order to, really get the acreage cleared that they need, have done a lot of, what's that called?
Broadcast.
What,
Control burn.
no, the
Mastication.
thank you, mastication, oh well. And so that, this, has aided Edison, very much able to really meet their, needs to open up those, plantations and save those trees. Now, this is that, picture I showed you earlier. This is only, of all the years I did this, all you had was big old Canon cameras, and I didn't have a phone in those days. And so these are the only pictures I have of actual burning of that plantation. And then I torched that off when it was a good, everything was just right. It looks pretty bad, doesn't it? Holy cow. Then just a few minutes later, that's what it looked like, because I burned at the right time. You hear people say, well, there's too much stuff, so we can't burn. Well, you just pick a day with more damp and or rain even. You can still burn. But while burning is the best, because that's Mother Nature's way of doing things, obviously today, in today's day and age, other means have to be used, like mastication. So. Now that's Mohawk Hill, or Mohawk. Ryan had a fuel break that went all the way from Pine Ridge clear up over Stevenson Mountain. And he opened that up and made an absolutely beautiful forest. We should have thousands and thousands of acres that look like that, but we just have that. That fire roared up from the San Joaquin on one side, and from 168 when Cal Fire lit it off, roared up there and did not burn that area that had been thinned out. In fact, Ryan told me that some of those piles that he had to burn didn't even burn up during that fire. So that's how what happens when you thin a forest. The Park Fire up in Northern California, same thing. They had a whole town was saved mainly because they had built a fuel break like that and stopped that fire. Okay, now we're going to get to the meat of the problem here. What's this going to cost to plant revegetate all of the creek fire? Well, I went down and visited with the Forest Service. Their goal is to plant 2,500 acres a year that's this plantation on this district. The other district on the other side of the creek I think will be also doing about 2,500 acres. That sounds like quite a bit. They're going to plant 100 trees per acre, about 20 by 20, and as I said, 2,500 acres a year. That is a tremendous undertaking for the Forest Service because it's been 4 years and already the ground is so overgrown, and there's still those snags that are growing there. They have to knock those down. So just a huge undertaking under the rules that the Forest Service has to operate on. So that's about $1.5 billion to reforest the Creek Fire. Now everybody says that's a lot of fire. Probably it seems like it, but if you went, I was at a meeting Thursday morning, the state wildfire and resiliency task force, the governor's task force, and they talk $1 billion here, $1 billion there, $1 billion here. Absolutely amazes me when they talk about the amount of money being spent trying to take care of our forest. And it doesn't need to be cost that much, but in this case, we screwed up, we people, and we have 400,000 acres of fire, and it's our responsibility to reestablish for the reasons that we've already talked about. Wildlife, the key word. Not only the $1.5 billion to plant, and those numbers are just my numbers, probably low, I hate to say, but that's, don't take it to the bank, especially if you want to draw on it. But, and then it's going to cost quite a bit to maintain it and do what we saw in the previous slides, either by fire or mastication to knock that the competing brush down to maintain that. So it's going to cost another $500 million at least in order to get our forest back to a sustainability that will take care of the wildlife species that Walt had talked about. And it sounds like a huge undertaking. It also sounds like, well, you know, it's not in my lifetime, so why do I care? That is what the public says. They so often say, well, I'm not going to see it. It's not my backyard, whatever. There's all kinds of excuses by people of what. But again, that fire was our fault, and we are responsible for reintroducing the forest back in that area. What scares me is that we are only a small part of what is going on in the state of California. It just dumbfounds me. All the areas that I cruised timber when I was a consultant, up and down the state, over on the coast, I'm all over, everywhere. Huge fires, areas that I cruised now is denuded by wildfire. I was just talking to a guy, and the Dixie Fire was 1 million acres on the Upper Feather River Canyon, 1 million acres, the same thing. Timber companies wiped out, things like that. So that's a tremendous problem that we have to muster our forces to produce those young trees. Once again, private industry is stuck their nose into it and showed the government really how things should be. Sierra Pacific Industries built a tree nursery producing trees like you saw on that one slide, the little tiny. Right now, they're going to produce this next year 12 million seedlings every year. And they're expanding that to 25 million. And the government still has not geared up to meet those demands. And there's just tens of thousands of acres that need to be covered to be replanted of the recent fires. And let's just talk about fires since 2002, where they started going over 100,000 every fire. Most of those fires have not even been replanted. The McNally fire in 2002 has not even been replanted. They just let it go. And it's just a real shame. But when you start looking at the costs and the government says, well, I gotta get it in my budget, ta-da, 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 it becomes a very, very much challenge. And that's why the resiliency fund, you know, just doing a little bit from the local people, that's what we need. So, you know, I've talked about cost, but what about benefits? There's ecosystem benefits. That is a very interesting concept. In 1993, I read a op-ed in Newsweek magazine. Now, I don't like Newsweek, and I didn't like this person writing the op-ed. A professor from Stanford that I looked her up, and she was some flower child that just was, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I always said, a good idea is still a good idea, even from an enemy. And so I read that, and I've done a lot of research, and there's a ecosystem services is what it's called, is a very legitimate thing. It is so hard to understand because there's no dollars. All of you drink free water. In California, well, the whole United States, our water is free. Yeah, your water bill says it's not free, but the water is free. Getting it to your house may not be free, but our water is free. Our air is free. The deer that some people hunt are free. The rifle, probably not free. Our ecosystems, and we've never measured those things. And that article, Butterflies Are Not Free, talked about that. We have not properly allocated our monetary system to account for those ecosystem services. And I've done a lot of research when I was at Edison, and there's a lot of good examples of what it really costs. Just CO2. If you look at the amount of CO2 that will be sequestered in the footprint on the trees that I was talking about, is unbelievable. As those trees grow, each board foot is 25% of carbon that is taken from the air, and then oxygen is released. So just the CO2, the air quality and quantity is very, very important to us, especially when you think, well, if you don't take care of CO2, you're all going to have to drive electric vehicles. So just think about that. So I'm going to end here today just saying that if the museum sees fit to invite me back next year, I'm going to explain ecosystem services. I'm going to stop right there. Any questions?
I have one. When you would light one of those fires for like a brushy area, did it scare you?
Nah, he's fine.
I was thinking, you'd just be, every time you would do that, you'd think that your heart would be pounding, not knowing what would happen. Yeah.
Well, after the first day, you get used to it. And what you can't hear from that picture is the tremendous roar. As the pine needles and the leaves go up, it makes a heck of a sound. I had a boss early on visit from down south, scared the whole EP Jeter. He headed back to LA. Yeah, it is. But, you know, it doesn't take long to get used to it.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know the numbers, and I'm trying to find those, but I've heard it takes roughly 6 times more per acre to deal with the forest burning and the aftermath of a forest fire than it does to manage the forest per acre. Is that legit, like 6 times more?
I would say more than that,
Yeah.
more than 6. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the ounce of prevention
Right.
to the pound of cure. It is that scenario, and probably more than that ratio too.
Yeah, thank you.
A good example is the program I had at Edison. I didn't have any amount of money that they have. Where's Ryan? They have a great budget. I had no budget at all, and I did it through logging and burning, and I was able to do it. And my goal in those days, now that's quite a few years ago, was $5 an acre, and now it's quite a bit more. So, yeah, that's all I have over here.
The 500,000 acres that burnt, you had the two lines. What was the lower elevation back when it was healthy forest?
There was great big trees down at Toll House, a place called Hazlet Basin. The area of Toll House up to the ridge on where Albury Road is, most of that fire, most of those trees were wiped out in either 1927 or 33 Toll House fire. It came up and wiped out. There was sugar pine there, great big pine, ponderosa pine, and so that area had big trees. And in fact, there's still remnants of those trees below Toll House on Toll House Creek. So on that map, the line was very straight, but it actually down creeks more and then on ridges no. So, by the way, there was about 100,000 acres in that strip. The 500,000 is including the fire. So we have about 500,000 estimate that we really need to take care of, in my estimation, for our community.
Yeah, and just like now, that line's, it's a line on a map, but the vegetation type is bumping out and taking in the little microclimate areas where it can support timber. Historically, that would have been more down the drainages, with the ridge tops being more of a mixed chaparral.
Oh, here we go.
In some of the areas that burned from the creek fire, I noticed that a lot of black oak and ceanothus has come back. Are those areas that you would want to potentially reseed with conifer or other types of pine trees?
Absolutely, yeah. Those black oaks were all there when that was ponderosa pine, and they're coming back because they're stump sprouting and they've got that root base. The ponderosa is not going to do that, and that's wonderful that they're coming back like that. What we want to do is we want to get the pine back in there, because think about that giant footprint of the creek fire and how far away the seed source is now for the pine that was in there before with the black oak. And so the goal that we need to have now is to get that pine back in the area, to cut possibly hundreds of years off the time it would take for it to naturally work its way back into that location.
Is it an issue though when you come talking about like sunlight, for example, these oaks have already got a few years head start. So when you kill off the oaks in order to get the pine in there, is it an issue then for the oak to come back?
Yeah, you wouldn't kill all the oaks in any particular area, especially not the black oaks. We have shade tolerant and shade intolerant tree species. Pine is a shade intolerant species. So you go in first in the first entry with your pine species, because the fir and the cedar and the oaks, they'll come in the understory and make a very diverse and natural forest, as opposed to if you let everything go back to brush and oaks, that's going to shade the ground level, and your pine's not going to come in.
Where they took the vegetation there on Chipper Ranch, are they gonna replant that at some point in time, or have they already?
Most area has been replanted, quite a bit of it. A lot of it's been replanted, yeah.
Good, okay.
They're this tall now.
Yeah, they'll be poking their nose up.
Along with, on Eric's line, is our area unique in regards to like what the Resiliency Fund has done and is doing, and what Edison is doing, and the amount of people taking advantage of the CFIP grants? Are we a little bit, are the other areas as progressive as what's going on here?
Actually, there are a lot of communities are doing the same thing. And that's what's neat about it. On that task force that I attend on that, little communities up and down the state, each individual is, like our group, just started something and it expanded. And in some cases, they have to get grants, and then things are very difficult. As we found out, trying to get grants, it costs more for us to administer a grant than it does for what gets done out on the ground. So a lot of the groups have stopped going after grants, but probably the most active group are the Native Americans up and down on the coast, the Pomos, the Washoe, just on that meeting. Every meeting I've gone to up and down the state always centers on Native American tribes that jumping on the bandwagon to try and manage their land. Yeah.
And I'll give a quick shout out to our National Forest Foundation partners that are here today. They're doing a ton of work throughout the state. Reforestation, fuels management, they're doing some fantastic work. Not just in California too, but in the whole Western United States. So there's a lot of communities going through the same thing.
Are they doing some control burns too then, to mitigate that stuff all around?
Yeah, control burns are tricky. They, first you have to have a fairly large project area, a landscape level project area for the most parts, and then you need to have, landowner buy-in pretty much all the way around, and, agency buy-in, and then it's all gonna depend on the conditions. So control burning is great. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to just go in and treat things mechanically, where you can eliminate some of the variables.
Yeah, prescribed fire was taboo totally when I went to work for Edison Company, and I still did it but I was, hanging my you-know-what out on that. And I covered a lot of ground. It is significantly harder, even though all the agencies say, controlled burning or prescribed fire is beneficial. It's harder to burn now. There's so many rules. It's just the government has taken over, and I was on the Southern Sierra Prescribed Fire Council, and it seems like every meeting that I went to, it got harder because somebody raised their hand and said, "Oh, we ought to do this. Oh, we need to do that. Oh, you have to have this qualification." And on Thursday, there was a guy who called himself a prescribed fire boss, and he had now just typical bureaucracy. He was this boss, but he had a prescribed fire boss that did this and a prescribed. He had a whole layer of prescribed fire bosses underneath him, and it's just a pure bureaucracy. When that fire that you saw, I went out there, nobody was even knew I was doing it. And so I had to keep it secret, but even the community did not know. It's very difficult now.
John, can I have 5 minutes to add to your story?
Well, boss, yeah.
Can I have 5 minutes?